Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us digitally, as I see the members of the audience present. Unfortunately, Mayor White was unable to attend this meeting, so I will be presiding in her absence. We do have several housekeeping things that we need to do. So we will need a motion to amend the agenda that will require suspending the rules so we can go into closed session to discuss matters of privilege with our attorney. We will also need to add 2 contractual items which are related to Tropical Storm number 8 infrastructure repairs, and both of these new items will precede the scheduled supplemental review of the UDO led by Mr. Kirkland. So I need a motion to suspend the rules.
I'll make a motion to suspend the rules to amend the agenda to add a closed session to consult with the town attorney, to preserve the attorney-client privilege, and add an item to consider 2 contracts for potential Tropical Storm number 8 infrastructure repairs. And then I'll also make a motion to go to closed session to consult with the town attorney.
Yeah.
Pardon?
There'll be separate motions.
Okay.
Is there a second? Thank you. All in favor? Go ahead, Bill. You want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to go into closed session and consult with the town attorney pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143-318.11A3.
Is there a second? Second. Thank you. All in favor? We are proceeding to closed session. We are back from executive session. No action was taken. We have a motion.
I'll make a motion to withdraw the bid for San Nourishment, release the bid bond, and direct staff to put the bid out again.
Do we need to specify weeks in that? We do.
Clarify that that's for Weeks Marine.
Okay. With that modification, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you, Mr. Grant, for the motion. We have 2 contracts to consider. I'm going to ask our manager if she would kindly preview them.
Thank you. Yes, the 2 contracts in front of you are a result of our informal bid for the PTC-8 repairs. Apologies on a slight delay there, but we have gotten 2 vendors and their subsequent contracts in front of you so that we can proceed with both of them at the same time to enable us to get the repairs moving as quickly as possible, having 2 vendors on all of these repairs needed from that recent storm. You will recall you approved the money back in November, and we anticipate that we will be reimbursed through the FEMA and state process, but we had to upfront the money. So this is already budgeted and within the parameters to begin with your authority to approve these contracts pending legal review.
I have a question for the assistant town manager. I'm assuming that he feels like these, I just want to confirm he feels like these are good prices, reasonable prices that we received. Thank you.
My concern about CDOG is this is a commercial business that's run out of their house. They've been doing it for years. Our previous town manager was going to address that. They've got commercial construction vehicles all over the backyard. They do have a fence now, but it's clearly visible from the street. They run a golf cart rental business out of their house, and the golf carts are just strewn all over the yard. So if there was a close bidder, I would keep this in mind. If there was a close second bidder, I do have a concern about not the work that they do, it's more of the relationship that they have with their business in the town of Oak Island.
So let me ask the planning director, I'm going to follow up on your point, Bob. Has this particular organization been cited?
I'd have to go back and check the records to see if we have a code case on them. I don't believe we do. One of the topics under supplemental regulations that we have for you today is home occupations, which would cover people running a business out of their home.
Do you know, have knowledge that they were not
I know
cited?
I'm almost certain they have not. Our previous town manager and the owner of this firm have a very close personal relationship.
I don't have my list of Alliance violations, but do we know if they appeared on the list?
No, without cross-checking those references, no.
So
I mean, I don't want to delay the work. The work needs to be done.
my point is, if there are violations or a violation, it might conceivably be disqualifying it, but absent that, this is the competitive best bid we received, correct?
Yes, sir, there were, actually, it was bid in 10 actual increments of work at 10 locations.
I can't hear you.
Yes, sir. So the bids were received for 10 locations where scoping was described for the bidding contractors, and we awarded low bid for each of those locations. And so what you see is 3 of those locations were with McPherson, 7 were with CDOT.
Okay, thank you.
What I suspect we're going to run into as we start to look at home occupations, it's going to be maybe a fairly protracted discussion. We may get pushback from some of these folks, so it may not be a quick fix to get these home occupations abiding by the ordinance.
That may be the case, but in the instant matter before us, right? We have a
Right.
competitive low bid. We're not aware of any violations, so I don't see disqualification.
They were not on the Alliance report.
Lisa, this is a motion that incorporates both of the bids?
Yes,
Okay.
or you can break it apart if you need to, that's fine.
Do I have a motion?
Well, before we make a motion, I think it concerns me that there's speculation. We have an adequate low bid from a reliable vendor that does good work, and yet we're sitting here casting shadows on this vendor. There are no outstanding violations on their business. There is no proof presented on any relationships with prior staff at all. And if they're listening to this, I mean, we're trying to be business friendly in this town, I thought, is what we talked about last week. And so I have concerns about talking in ill about services when we have no proof of any documented violations or shady business going on in the past. So I will go ahead and make the motion that we approve the contracts for McPherson Marine Services in the amount of $120,600 and Sea Dog Marine Construction amount of $253,350 pending review from the town attorney, and to authorize the town manager to execute these contracts.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? I'm sorry. Your hand's not up.
Oh,
Just want to be clear.
it's going to pass,
Was-
it's going to pass as is. Yeah.
Okay. Motion carries 3-2.
And Councilman, just, Martin, a
I'm
point of
sorry.
clarification.
I'm sorry, can you ask for all opposed, please?
All opposed?
Thank you.
I was not casting dispersions on this firm. I'm simply saying it's a home business it's a commercial business run out of the house. I know that they have, a number of people in our community have filed code violations historically with the town, and if it's not, if it hasn't been dealt with in the past, then I don't know why it wasn't, but I know a number of people have filed complaints about that.
And there are any number of violations which I want to get the town manager's input on that were not picked up by Alliance. Another is a commercial operation that's operating out of a home. So I want to talk to the town manager about how she would like us to lay that information in order.
I think we're ready to proceed with supplemental.
Sir, thank you.
I need to leave, so I'll step out quietly, but you can get started. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As Mayor Pro Tem just mentioned, we're here today to continue our discussion related to supplemental regulations in the Unified Development Ordinance. A couple of things I want to start off with. First, basically my intent here with the council members is to basically run through the spreadsheet information that I provided you the previous workshop. If you recall, there's spreadsheet broken down with the type of supplemental regulations, the recommended uses that it would be applied to from the planning board, and to see if there's general consensus on items, or if there's items where there may be discussion or issues. Since this is a workshop session, you won't be amending the planning board's recommendation in this, but it does help us prepare for an eventual public hearing if we know some of your concerns up front. So that should there be an amendment to the planning board's recommendation, we can potentially help you work through that when we get to that stage. Another small piece of housekeeping that I want to start off with is everyone's favorite planning topic, which is Senate Bill 382, which was passed last year. Just a reminder to everyone that this now law extends downzoning provisions to local governments and includes in the definition of downzoning creating nonconformities in not residential zoning. So commercial zoning, industrial zoning, anything that's not residential would apply to that. So it does create a little bit of a difficulty for this when applying new supplemental regulations to things that we already might have in the town, because they would presumably become non-conforming because they don't, because they may not meet those new supplemental regulations. Staff has done an initial review of the supplemental regulations and found a list of issues where there may be maybe the creation of a nonconformity by adoption of additional supplemental regulations. I'd like to go through that with you briefly before we get started, just to keep these in mind. First, I know we have some of these on the island donation boxes. I'm going to run through these. Religious institutions, private clubs or lodges, contractors' offices, recreational campgrounds, fire stations, multi-unit assisted living with services, multifamily dwellings, dwellings attached to a business, automobile parking garages or parking lots independent, car washes, nursing homes, rental of goods, merchandise, and equipment, restaurants with drive-through services, storage outside completely enclosed structures, public and commercial recreation facilities, and exterminating and pest control services. So those were the ones that we were able to identify as existing within the town, and so adopting additional supplemental regulations, we would have to triple check and make sure that the existing businesses would comply with those supplemental regulations to avoid a potential downzoning there. Certainly, if there's any more that council thinks of as we go through this, please let us know so that we can be prepared for that as well. So before we get started, any questions or anything that I can help
Do we have
address?
that?
This? This was in the agenda packet. I apologize from our first workshop review.
That list, do they have the list?
Of the list or the spreadsheet?
Well, either one, I mean, I don't know that list.
I can make copies if you
Yeah.
want to take over.
If you just want to tell me what to do, I can have some, yeah, I can do it. What, do you remember what meeting offhand it was?
This was
Apologize.
October 9.
October?
Yes.
Oh,
And it starts on page 16 and ends on page 21. Do you want to take it?
Okay.
Okay.
And if I could, I'd just like to make a general comment to my colleagues. So in June of 2023, the council recommended that the planning board and town staff review the supplemental regulations found in the UDO. Matt and I sort of disagree on this, because what planning board did was they did not review all supplemental regulations. They reviewed ones where changes were made in the table of uses. If you stop me, Matt, when I misspeak, is that correct? Okay. And the point I want to make is that we definitely need to go through these that we have in front of us today. But there are still 48 supplemental regulations in our UDO that have not been reviewed by planning board. And so I don't want us to lose sight. A lot of the ones that we're reviewing now are new and came about because we changed designations in the UDO. So I don't want us to let those other 48 go without the planning board or us or somebody reviewing those to make sure that they have the regulations that we feel are needed in there.
May I ask, does the planning board have the list of 48 which have not been reviewed?
Not that I'm aware of. I just compared what we have today versus what's in the Muni code, and that's how I came up
You
with it.
have such a list.
I do.
Can be presented to the planning board via that. Okay. Thank you.
Anything else before we dive in? Do you want to wait a couple of minutes for Lisa to print some of these pages so you have them in front of you?
And that wasn't the meeting that it was in, so I'm looking for it.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I'm going to find it.
No, you're okay. It's okay.
That's all
We should
right.
have had
like to have a copy.
these printed out for you.
Pat, how many, if there were 48 that haven't been reviewed, how many do we have that are going to be reviewed?
We
Just to
made
put
it-
in context.
We made it into the hundreds in terms of total supplemental regulations. Oh, I can actually look at it.
There are 56 on our list today.
Okay, so there you go.
And I had 2 of them marked to be removed based on our discussion Tuesday night and Senate Bill 382, so that would take us down to 54 today. But there's still 48 out there that need to have a look, we need to have a look at.
I had, let's find the last supplemental regulation reference in the red line draft. Yeah, we made it up to 108, so, yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
about right.
56 and 48, yep.
Are they, the ones that haven't been reviewed, do they tend to be a narrow scope, or do they touch?
Yeah, so the supplemental regulations in general apply to a specific use. So you take a use out of your table and you say, okay, there's higher standards that need to be met in order to establish this use. So, yeah, they are typically pretty general, and that's why there's so many in the proposal, is to add those to ones that don't have it.
Why don't we take a 5-minute recess?
Yeah.
Yeah, I-
Sure, absolutely. No, it's better to have it in front of you so you can.
We are in recess for 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm ready whenever Mike is.
I think he's getting ready to start right now.
We are back from a short break, necessitated by the need to acquire materials. Everyone has the requisite materials, so back to you, Mr.
All
Kirkland.
right, thank you, I appreciate that. One last little bit I did want to mention. As I mentioned, since this is a workshop session, you wouldn't be amending the planning board recommendations, and so we would like to try to get through this material expeditiously. So if we find ourselves, at an impasse, Catherine's graciously volunteered to write anything down on the whiteboard that we feel like warrants further exploration as we go through this material. So let's just keep that in mind. And with that, at the very top of the table you have in front of you, is one of the first supplemental regulations. And as I mentioned, on the left is a brief description of the supplemental regulation. The middle column relates to the uses that the planning board recommending applying this supplemental regulation to. And so first is to require low-impact development stormwater management. The planning board recommended applying that to both light and heavy manufacturing, penal and correctional facilities, laboratories for research and testing, coliseums and stadiums designed to accommodate more than 1,000 people, multifamily dwellings, and truck stops. For those of you who aren't aware, low-impact development stormwater management, typically when you think of stormwater management, you think of a large retention pond. Low-impact development tends to spread that out among things like swales, rain gardens, impervious surface materials. There's a good manual that the state's developed to identify these low-impact stormwater practices. And you typically see them most regularly applied to large uses that take up a lot of land, so that you're trying to mitigate that stormwater appropriately. But once again, if there's any questions, concerns, or anything you'd like to air now, or if there's kind of general consensus on this looks good.
We're going to go through all these first before we actually look at the supplemental regulations.
I think it will be good because this will cover the broad topics before we dig into kind of the.
On that first section, all that it really affects today would be dwelling in a multifamily, because we don't have coliseums and correctional facilities.
Well, that's right, and, going back to Senate Bill 382, what you can actually apply these to is things that we don't have in the town right now, because otherwise, if they don't meet that supplemental regulation, then you're setting up a nonconformity. So like where we have dwelling, multifamily, based on Senate Bill 382, we'd actually recommend when you get to actual adoption that you not adopt it for that particular use to avoid creating a nonconformity. But yes, anything that we don't have in the town, future development can apply to that. Okay. All right, so moving on, if there's no other discussion or questions on that item, dark sky lighting. Dark sky lighting is a lighting principle related to making sure that all of your artificial lighting is downcast. It doesn't cast onto adjacent properties, and essentially does exactly what it says. It keeps the sky dark, cuts down on lighting pollution. The recommended uses from the planning board were, once again, some similar ones: light and heavy manufacturing, penal and correction facilities, laboratories, coliseums. This one also added automobile parking garages or parking lots, publicly owned parking lots, car washes, nightclubs and social clubs, restaurants with drive-thru services, government buildings, offices, public and commercial recreation facilities, and truck stops. Once again, this can only apply to the uses that we don't currently have in the town. So some of those that we do have now, where we create a nonconformity, we would not be able to adopt that without without getting the consent of every property owner in the zoning district, which.
So the current nightclubs, social clubs are not impacted by this?
Well, if there's one so if there's anything in the town that cannot comply with the supplemental regulation, when we get to the adoption phase, we will recommend that you not adopt it in order to avoid creating a downzoning issue with Senate Bill 382. I'm mentioning these because they're in the list, but you can cross-reference for things that we have in the town and know that we'll have to recommend not adopting them.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions about it or anything that maybe you think should be in there that's not, like I said, open to feedback at this time. It helps us when we do get to.
Matt, looking at the last column that you have, in the last phrase in the last sentence, talks about modest lighting.
Yes, sir.
What does that mean?
That's a great question. Dark sky lighting is certainly modest lighting, in my opinion. It's, once again, intended to cut down on light pollution and cut down on light trespass. This is the very last column you see, and I didn't really touch on it at this time, but it would certainly be touched on in the adoption phase, is how these supplemental regulations might be consistent with our adopted land use plan. So when there was something that we could reference, we went ahead and pulled it in here just for the board's or the council's knowledge. But yeah, in my opinion, it certainly is modest lighting for dark sky principles to be implemented.
So Matt, to answer your question, there were several instances in the actual text of the supplemental regs that I made a note. Why not dark sky lighting? So that would add to this list here, but it's going to be really time consuming if I sit here and try to go through and find all of them right now.
And feel free to send me any notes you have, absolutely. Happy to share those and review them for you.
Currently, do we not have dark sky lighting?
We do not. We have several rules around trying to prevent light trespass onto adjacent properties, but dark sky lighting takes it up another notch as far as regulation and implementation goes. It's a bit of a higher level than what we have currently for light trespass. Also important here as a Sea Turtle Beach, to cut down on light pollution in general.
Yeah, I'm certainly supportive. I just would like modest to have more teeth. That's right. What does that, does that mean fewer lights around my parking area if I own a business? Does it mean less lighting? Because we've also alternately, at least I did at the last meeting, complained about the street lighting that we have on Oak Island Drive. So I don't want that to be modest. I want it to be safety adequate, right?
Yes, sir.
So we've a couple different ways we can work with this.
Well, we're very lucky. We have two of our steering committee members from the Comprehensive Land Use Plan in attendance in this workshop today, since these adopted plan considerations are straight from that. Anything else on dark sky lighting? The next few, and I'll somewhat clump these together, the next four supplemental regulations deal with buffer yard requirements. Our buffer yard requirements that are currently in the ordinance essentially give you a range of options depending on the use and the adjacent use. So whether you have residential next to commercial or next to industrial, it'll give you a buffer yard standard. However, there might be instances where a more specific buffer yard makes sense than the general category, and typically two options that you see in our current UDO. So what the planning board did here was take specific uses and recommend very specific buffer yards instead of some of the optionality that's in our current ordinance. So the first one is a type A buffer yard. This is our least intense buffer yard requirement. And the planning board recommended to make that specific to country clubs, community centers, golf courses, automobile parking garages or parking lots independent, publicly owned parking lots independent, and public recreation facilities outdoors. So once again, this is our least stringent buffer requirement that we
Is
have.
the shade trees, is that is that new language? Or is that language that's already in there?
It's already in the ordinance, yeah. This would just take our existing buffer requirements and make it more specific for these specific
To those.
uses. Yes, sir.
So just from my opinion, that buffer yard is not even adequate for some of these uses that would be adjacent to residential uses. And it's to your point, John, you know, we can write a book, but if there are no teeth in it, we just got a bunch of words on the page.
Yeah, I mean, I think where possible, without the tripping 382 and lawsuits, we should spec the broadest possible buffer, right? Because it preserves the privacy and the continuity of life in a neighborhood. And we have residential, you know, backing into commercial everywhere, right? So that's a concern. But the rub that I see here is the bind is that so much of it is already in existence, we can't downzone it.
Yes, sir.
Right?
That's correct.
But where we can, I agree with my colleague, we should make it larger certainly than what it currently is.
Yeah, a strategy you could use, should you want to amend this when it gets to the motion after the public hearing, is I've kind of given you a breakdown, as Terry mentioned, of what these buffers look like. So you could recommend adopting even more stringent language than just establishing an A1 or A2 buffer. So if you know that a A1 buffer is 7.5 feet wide with 2 shade trees and 10 evergreen trees, you could say, well, I'd like to bump that up to 4, and, you know, whatever you feel is adequate.
So potentially modify both the width as well as the numbers of trees and shrubs.
We have the inconvenience, though, just about everything on Oak Island Drive is commercial, and 1 block behind it is residential.
Yes, sir.
And, you know, I'd like to help the residentials not have lights shining into their living room, but I don't want to hinder the commercial any more than we have to.
This buffer yard being 7.5 feet, that's basically 6 inches shy of this table, is the width of that. And so how dense can you know, and how dense is 2 shade trees and 10 evergreen trees going to be as a buffer, you know, from that business?
Our problem is so much of it is already set, right? So this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, this is proactive, but only going forward to new, right? Because much of Oak Island Drive, the commercial zone backs immediately into residential, and to Terry's point, it's like 7.5 feet, it's like someone's right on top of you. Okay, so we can increase the width and the vegetative screen for new, and we should, I believe.
So our automobile repair centers, are they currently in here and we're not adding them, or?
I believe
Need to
auto
add that.
repair is currently listed in the table. I can actually,
Not that we have room, but we do have some existing ones now. but-
yeah.
We do.
I'd have to review the ordinances a little bit on that. I apologize, I don't have my laptop and horn badge at home.
I don't see automobile repair.
It's not in the list of recommended additional supplemental regulations, I believe.
It's not.
Therein lies.
Once again, if you add it, you have to, as we kind of belabored a lot,
Therein lies.
can't create the nonconformity, you know, so the ones that we have.
I understand that.
Therein lies my concern, is that under the new supplemental regulations, the newly created supplemental regulations, we don't have automobile. That's in, you know, I think that's in a supplemental reg that wasn't reviewed, or that may not have a supplemental reg because it may be a permitted use by right.
Sure, it doesn't keep going.
Pat, can we add that as a
Yeah.
placeholder now, and then look into that
Yes, sir.
when you have an opportunity?
Absolutely.
Please.
Automobile repair, and do what with the automobile repair? Nothing with the existing ones?
Well, you wouldn't be able to do anything with the existing ones with the.
Ask them nicely.
You could ask, that's great, you could ask nicely.
Seriously, I mean,
No, absolutely.
I kind of flippantly say that, but, again, being a good neighbor, maybe there is an opportunity to make some changes.
Well, in some cases, and this may be one, the one you're talking about, there's not a buffer at all.
Right. And like Pat's.
Well, and we do have car washes in here, right? That are existing in the town now, too.
Yes, sir, that's right, right. It's one of the things.
Same kind of problem.
And one of the things that the Senate Bill 382 threw a monkey wrench into, yes, sir. Okay, I'll move through the next two, or the next three a little bit quickly. Certainly you can add any extra thoughts. So our Class B buffer has two levels, a Class B1 and B2. B2 is the more dense of the two, so it is slightly narrower in terms of width, but it does have a higher planting requirement for 4 shade trees and 20 evergreen shrubs planted per 100 feet. The recommendation was to add that supplemental regulation to manufacturing heavy, schools K through 12, fire stations, governmental processing facilities, car washes, and commercial recreation facilities indoor. I assume that the sentiment is similar to our previous discussion that we just had. Anything specific to this one?
This is D.
Oh, we haven't got to D yet, we're on B2. We're still on the very first page at the very
Yeah,
bottom.
okay.
Yes, sir. Moving on a little bit, Class C buffer yards. Class C buffer yards require an opaque fence in addition to, well, actually in place of some of your screening plants. This was recommended to be applied to private clubs or lodges, penal and correctional facilities, nightclubs and social clubs, rental of goods, taxi stands, wholesale sales, storage of outside completely enclosed structures, recycling processing centers, outdoor commercial recreation facilities, and exterminating and pest control services. Once again, it takes that, some of the required vegetative material and requires an opaque fence or a wall in place of that. And then finally, for the buffer yard requirements, a Class D buffer yard, which includes in place of a fence, an actual earthen berm with 3-to-1 slope, and that the vegetation must be within a minimum of 6 feet at the time of maturity and planting. And then applying that to mining or quarrying operations, including on-site sales of products. I know we have some sand mining on 211. I don't believe any of that's in the town currently, but certainly something I've seen quite a bunch of across eastern North Carolina.
Let me ask you a question, Matt, if I may.
Absolutely.
Assuming that 382 doesn't get modified or isn't substantially modified, is there a workaround that's possible? For example, if we, meaning the town, decided that we wanted to, as part of the streetscape project, for example, coming out of the land use, we wanted to enhance the downtown appearance and provide greater buffers, and we were willing to incentivize that, and individual owners agreed to do it, is that going to violate 382? I mean, is there a way around this?
There are a couple of things that the town can do. I think what you're mentioning is probably the most feasible, which is wherein you would establish a new type of zoning district that's not applied anywhere. Call it whatever you want, downtown zoning for Oak Island. And you essentially, like you said, try to incentivize people to opt into that zoning, because then the property owner's asking to have their property rezoned into that. Certainly, if it was in conjunction with, say, the town improving the streetscape on East Oak Island Drive, that might incentivize some property owners to voluntarily come in. Because you can voluntarily, if somebody asks to be downzoned, that's fine, that's still allowed, but the property owner agreeing to it is kind of the main takeaway from it. And it would have to be a totally new zoning district, because otherwise you'd have to get the entire district to give you written consent to make that change. That certainly is a feasible workaround.
So if
But it would require
eight
the
out of
development
10
of
of them,
totally new zoning districts.
if only 8 out of 10 has to be included in that, and with the other 2 wouldn't have to then go along with it.
No, it would, like I said, it would be a voluntary, people would have to petition to have the zoning map amended into this new zoning district. So we'd have written consent if there's 10 property owners on a block and 5 of them wanted to ask to be in that zoning district. The other 5 can stay in the existing zoning district. We
With the
only
other
apply
2
to
out of
the
10.
ones. Yeah.
Matt, maybe a silly question I should have asked in the beginning, but again, with Senate Bill 382, we're adding new uses to the existing regulations, therefore creating a quasi-down zoning for them, correct? So, but we're going through this exercise now. Is it really, I guess I'm trying to understand that.
You're okay. So similar to what we did at the table of uses when you adopted that last week, what we did was identify the uses that would run afoul of Senate Bill
Right.
382 and recommend that you adopt the changes except for these. So we would do something similar here. We've done an initial pass-through of those. So I'm running through everything because that's what you've got in your packet. But yes, when it comes to adoption, should Senate Bill 382 still stand at that point, we'd have some things that we'd have to recommend you not adopt at that point.
So follow-up question. So commercial recreational facility outdoor currently is not subject to the buffer yard requirements that we're now potentially having them.
So it's currently subject to a Class B buffer. But the recommendation would be to make that a required Class C buffer.
So making it a little bit more stringent for them, right? So is that not, again, by definition, is that,
That would be a downzoning, yes, sir.
it would be down?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So it's only for going forward.
Hmm?
So it's only for future businesses.
So the best thing to do in that instance is to not adopt the supplemental regulation for that particular use. Even if, all zoning regulation looks forward. So say, for example, even prior to Senate Bill 382, right? You establish a new supplemental regulation. We can't make the old businesses go back, or have to redevelop their property without jumping through some pretty specific hoops. So you have a non-conforming situation, which is the way most places have always recommended. But now we can't even create the non-conformity, is what it boils down to. So we've lost the ability to even create that non-conforming situation, is the effect of Senate Bill 382. So,
And we all got a letter last week from a business saying they were afraid they were going to be pushed into the non-conforming, but you told us that is not the case.
well, under our recommendation, we made sure that was taken care of, yes, sir. Which is why I have a public hearing in the first place, because you can,
Yeah.
might be something you miss that we want to make sure we take care of. Any other questions?
So, I mean, the
concerns?
frustration here is palpable, because unless, someone buys land, well, there's very little of, but theoretically, they bought land, right, and they decided to have a paintball business, they could be subject to these new restrictions for outdoor recreation. But the current ones that we have are not. We can't do anything with them, correct?
That's correct, you couldn't create a nonconformity for them.
But even for the new ones, though, again, I apologize from like the bottom of my heart on this, but let's make sure I'm understanding this. So if we're putting something more restrictive, that we're going to eventually vote on, making it more restrictive, is that not in fact creating a downzoning where they could say, I don't want to do that?
Yes, sir.
Then I guess
Why
that's
are
why
we
we
doing
do
this?
this.
That's what he's saying. It sounds like all of these.
Just for the future.
I'm not saying it that clearly, but thank you.
You can't do it in the future.
Yeah, 4 businesses in 10 years.
You can't do it in the future. I guess my frustration is let's work on what we can approve and not sit here and ruminate over what we can't approve.
Right.
We all know the list is extensive, but I hope we can focus our time on what we can modify and make more stringent.
So I think to answer your question, Mr. Chilo, as well, it sounds like we have a lot of these uses in the town, and we do have several of them. I found 20 in my review. There's several of these things that we don't have in the town, so things that would fall under light or heavy manufacturing, penal and correction facilities, laboratories for researching and testing, coliseums and stadiums designed to accommodate more than 1,000 people, truck stops. These are things that we don't have in the town, so we can establish supplemental regulations for those things because you're not creating a nonconformity because it doesn't exist in the town yet.
But we're devoting a lot of time to figuring out what to do about the Coliseum that's going to come to Oak Island someday, when Coliseum's not going to come to Oak Island anytime in my lifetime.
Well, and we've skipped over a conversation I know that Councilor Bach and I have had a couple of times, and that is, are there specific things that we want to prohibit in Oak Island? And we can show that they're detrimental to the health and safety of having those in Oak Island. So, my argument is don't approve them being here. Let's decide if we can prohibit them and just take them out altogether.
You make a good point. Whether we like 382 or not, it's the law.
Right.
Unlikely to be substantially modified, so let's focus on what we can do, right? Because all this other stuff is just proactive. It's, if somebody buys something in the mainland, builds a stadium, okay, what are the chances of that? Let's do what we can do now with what we have. I agree, that's far more important.
Yeah.
382 is like banging your head against that wall, so.
Adult entertainment centers or stuff like that, possibility that could show up here, unless we.
Outdoor gun ranges, slaughterhouses, those kinds of things. Do we want to try to see what legal basis we might have to prohibit those kind of uses?
Before it comes.
Before it comes.
Okay.
Okay.
Why don't we proceed that
Proceed?
way? That makes sense to me.
Yeah, good conversation, good discussion. So moving on from buffer yards to street yards, the planning board recommended enhancing our current street yard requirement for several uses, including both manufacturing categories, penal and correctional facilities, laboratories for research and testing, coliseums, stadiums designed to accommodate more than 1,000 people, automobile parking garages, independent car wash, nightclub and social clubs, and truck stops. So our street yard standards are specific now for new uses coming in, but this would enhance the level of planting required on that street yard for these uses. These are typically uses where you see additional street yard buffering in many jurisdictions. Moving on to the next subsection, additional setback requirements. Once again, increasing the minimum setback requirement for specific uses. Many of the same categories you just heard: manufacturing, mining, recycling processing centers, colleges and community colleges, country clubs, postal processing facilities, penal facilities, laboratories, coliseums, golf courses, nightclubs, truck stops, and veterinarians. So that is as many uses we don't currently have in the town, although some we do.
So adding those requirements, Adding those requirements that are not currently there to these businesses, those are outside of Senate Bill 382, then, is that correct?
What, the things that we don't currently have in the town, yes, sir. So things like light, heavy manufacturing, mining, recycling processing, colleges, postal processing facilities, penal corrections, laboratories, coliseums, truck stops.
So is the difference that that wouldn't change the use? That's just changing how it's used? I mean, so that's why it wouldn't run afoul of 382. It's not downzoning because it's not changing the use.
It's not downzoning because if you don't have something in the town, you can't create a nonconformity.
Right.
Because a nonconformity is something that already exists that doesn't meet your current zoning requirements. So if it doesn't exist in the town, we can modify the development regulations for that without creating a nonconformity.
But even if it's a use that's allowed in the town, then increasing some kind of buffer setback or something like that is not going to say you couldn't have that use.
That's correct.
Okay.
So, but to take up my colleague's question here, so I'm looking at this, so why wouldn't we say we don't want a truck stop in the town? Why wouldn't we say, I don't know if we can say we don't want a penal or correctional institution, but if we can say, no, we don't want that, take it out. We do want a post office, but, you know, and so, I'm just going through some of these things, we don't want them.
So what we would need, I think, is a legal opinion from Bro about can we meet the burden of proof that they are a hazard to our area and to our citizens? Because those are the two big things that you got to show to say this is prohibited.
I would argue that yes, that's true legally.
Yeah.
But there's another consideration here, and I don't know if it has legal merit, right? So you look down the last column, so the plan considerations, right? Again and again, we talk about small town connectivity and so on and so forth. And if that's the basis on which we don't want a truck stop or penal institution or a coliseum, right? That is legally permissible to say no. That's inconsistent with our view, right? Then we can do some, we can engage in protection, whereas this is just, you know.
I want to chime in on that. If you're going to exclude illegal use of property from your town entirely, you would say, okay, here's something that we don't want in this town. I think Ms. Carter is correct that you need to establish the specific public health safety criteria that you're using to prohibit that use in your town. That's why you typically see it applied to things like gun ranges, landfills, slaughterhouses, things like that, because you can, you can establish what those criteria that you're doing are. What you need to do is do that for each use that you're looking to prohibit, because a gun range has a very different public health safety consideration than a slaughterhouse does. So you do have, in my opinion, you do have to take those uses individually, make sure that you're very clear on what public health safety criteria you're using to prohibit those uses. Unfortunately, adopted plan consistency is usually not the only thing you have to establish to entirely prohibit a lawful use of property.
I realize that's
It helps.
stretching the
It's not
legal
the whole thing.
argument. I could say it's not only a plan consideration, it's inconsistent with our strategic plan.
Can
I
we,
mean, that's an argument. I'm not saying the court's going to accept it, but it's an argument.
Somehow Wilmington figured out how to do it. Because they have a list of 9 or 10 prohibited uses.
can we prohibit, say, truck stops from being in the confines of the island of Oak Island, but not prohibit it on 211? I have no idea what Drapac or Williamson, I mean, a 4-lane 211 might be a good place for a truck stop.
Yeah, that's where your actual zoning goes into play. So you have different zoning on the island than you do on the mainland. So you'd say, okay, it's allowed in the mainland zoning, CLD, for example, but on the island commercial zoning, the CB. Yes,
Matt, is it something you could work with the planning board, is to go through this and present a list of recommendations for prohibited uses? And at that point, we can potentially bring in counsel. But I want to put the cart before the horse.
Yeah, I think that would need to come from a majority of council in open regular session, if there was some direction for that, yes, sir. But it's certainly something we can work on.
Thank you.
Okay, let's work on through a little bit, unless there's any other discussion. Floor area ratios recommended to be established for light and heavy manufacturing and penal and correction facilities. You guys, I won't go into a whole lot of detail about floor area ratios. You've talked about it quite a bit. We were discussing house size regulations, so establishing some criteria for those to meet also helps reduce the overall footprint of the structure of the property.
Is this the first time we put floor area ratio in our language?
It would be at this point, yes, sir, since it wasn't established for house size. Yes, it would be established in the floor area ratio. The next one, prohibit certain types of development in special flood hazard area. Once again, this would apply to heavy manufacturing and laboratories for researching and testing. Typically where they might have some material you definitely don't want getting flooded out for those. Continuing along, limiting vehicular access from local streets. So this is typically something you see a lot of times for schools, and there's schools included in here, colleges, but also truck stops, restaurants with drive-through services, and kennels, where you might see a lot of traffic impacts. So keeping those off of your side local streets and keeping them on the streets that are designed to handle more
So
traffic volume.
The drive-through services that we have are grandfathered, is that what you're saying?
Those are one of the things we wouldn't recommend you adopt, because we do have drive-throughs that access off of local streets here in the town. Yes, sir.
Matt, in our previous conversation, I thought we couldn't necessarily carve out restaurants from, and separate that from other potential establishments for drive-through services.
No, what I recommended previously was that if you're going to look at dealing with drive-throughs in terms of walkability, you would want to look at all drive-throughs. You can stipulate that a restaurant with a drive-through be treated differently in your ordinance, but if you're looking at treating it from terms of walkability, a drive-through operates as a drive-through, whether it's a bank or a restaurant or a pharmacy or anything like that. So.
It was just restaurants is identified here, no other banks or any other types of businesses.
That's what the planning board recommends, yes, sir. And without getting too far down the rabbit hole, since we have some of those, it would be tough to back into regulation into them. Okay. This one's a little bit niche, so I apologize. Establishing a private library regulation in residential zoning districts to allow for little free libraries. The planning board was sensitive to allowing people to put a small, if you've seen them there, walk up, you can
Like they have
take
at
in
the
a
rec
book
center.
or grab a book, yeah, for individuals that may want to do that. So they did want to create an allowance that would essentially allow the dimensions of that to exist on a piece of property in residential zoning districts as well, for people that might want to put one in their yard. I think it's a great idea.
I have some comments or questions when we get to the specific text of the supplemental reg. I think this is a good add. Did the planning board consider other functions like this, like some towns are now doing food, like you can, people can leave canned goods, people can come take goods.
That's ideal for Oak Island
Does
because
that need to be,
Saturday
does that need to
tourists.
be defined in here, or, it's not a little library, it's a little.
food pantry. Food pantry.
I don't think they talked about it or thought about that, but it's a good idea, I think.
Because every time when tourists are leaving on Saturday, they have canned goods and what have you.
Okay. The next supplemental regulation, prohibiting adult establishment or sexually oriented businesses from operating inside of private clubs or lodges, or clubs and lodges, nonprofit. That one's pretty self-explanatory.
So that is an outright, you cannot have.
Well, sexually oriented businesses and adult establishments are listed in our ordinances as having certain regulations in order to meet. You have to be a certain distance from other types of uses. There's some separation requirements. I think the planning board was concerned about a private club, engaging in what might be considered sexually oriented business or adult establishment operations without getting a zoning violation, essentially. So they wanted to make sure that that was.
I'm in favor
For those
of that.
uses
That does get
prohibited.
us away from the small town feel.
They can do them, they just can't do them
In the clubs.
in private clubs or lodges or clubs and lounges that are nonprofit. So there's another example, morally, does that fit into our family-friendly?
So you're alluding that they could rent a private building and start a new business.
If they can meet all the requirements of the ordinance.
Kind of like what we said earlier. I would like for that to be one area
Prohibited uses.
that throw it into prohibited uses. 'Cause I don't think we need it.
Well, we go back to the suggestion that Terry made earlier. We need to talk to our attorney about, if there's, God forbid, a constitutional right to have a sex store, then we're not going to be able to ban it without endless litigation, losing litigation. Let's figure out what we can ban, what the standards will be, the kind of argument that we need to make that a court, if it goes that far, would say, okay. Because otherwise, we're just going through an exercise here. We can't take it out.
At this
I want our
point,
attorney to say, yeah, you can fight on this ground. Or it'll be synthetic. Nobody wants in their community a sex shop on the main street, which, by the way, we had at one point, but that's a different story.
I didn't know we had one.
It was a lingerie shop, 2005.
I didn't know.
Quite popular, actually.
Some things I don't need to know.
All right, sorry I told you, Bill.
all right. Moving on, establishing maximum density regulations for certain uses. This is a pretty common regulation in many towns across the country. So recommended maximum densities for multi-unit assisted living, multifamily dwellings, townhouses, and nursing homes. So some of the things where you commonly might see a density regulation in place.
It's not really that restrictive, though, 12 units per acre.
12 units per acre is typically what you see in a suburban multifamily development. It might range from 12 to 16 depending on the town. That's a pretty common one. And the same thing for townhouses. And typically townhouses it's tough to physically build a townhouse higher than 7 units per acre unless it's a really rigid block structure established as a part of that.
Again, I'll beat the horse one more time because it's still apparently a lot. So one question I'd want to ask the attorney is how restrictive can we be with density? Obviously, lower density is preferred. Are these numbers that are so mainstream that the court will accept it, or can we go lower? Huh? I don't know the answer to that question. Right? I'd like to hear what she or he has to say.
Okay. Moving on, requiring enclosed operation or storage of materials. This would apply to community or municipal sewage and water treatment plants, audio video production facilities, exterminating and pest control services with hazardous materials being stored indoors, and laundromats. So some of the things where you do see some chemicals applied there. And then the last one, the last column, there were some things that the planning board recommended, some specific regulations that did, to a use that didn't really fall under kind of a broad category. So there are several uses listed under this last entry in the spreadsheet table, and I'll run through those with you briefly. The first one was donation boxes. I know we've all seen the clothing donation bins in parking lots. The planning board recommended that those be required to meet all the underlying setback and development requirements. So I see a lot of times people put those kind of right on the property line because it's not really a structure. It's not bolted to the ground. It's essentially just sitting out there. So requiring that to meet the setbacks. One that, next thing is something that I gather will probably generate some discussion just based on hearing y'all talk about it. Home occupations. The planning board recommended additional regulations to regulate noise, vibration, glare, fumes, or electrical interference. Prohibit mechanical equipment other than is normally used for domestic or professional purposes. Prohibit change of appearance or other evidence of the conduct of the home occupation. Prohibit additional traffic than what you would normally see in a residential home. And then prohibit accessory building or outdoor storage use as a part of a home occupation.
Let me ask you a question, Matt. So, yes, indeed, we need more regulation. We've talked about this before. If I want to open a tutoring business out of my house, do I have to get a permit to do that?
That's a great question. We don't currently issue home occupation permits. Definitely something that could be added as a requirement. And that helps the business owner because we can list all of those supplemental regulations so they know what they have to comply with coming in.
Yeah.
And it helps us keep track of who's
By
established.
all means, we need a permit. We don't even know where they are, except for complaint calls. But more importantly, to your point, if I want to open a business, I now have the guidelines that the town's going to require, traffic, noise, equipment, so on and so forth. And my neighbors have the assurance that the town is actually regulating this, right? That it's not just haphazard. So I would start with permit, right?
That is an excellent point. Onslow County has a home occupation application. Durham County has a home occupation permit. And I would 110% support us moving to that, where we incorporate that into our process.
We absolutely, well, we're all, I think we're in agreement here, which is heartening. It would be like, I put out a sign that said, I'm a chiropractor, and I don't have a license. Like, to run a business, right, typically you get a permit, you register, and you comply with the town.
Yeah.
And the town supports you. We want businesses, right? Part of the tax base, but the way we have it, people just go into business. They go out, they go in, you know.
But we don't get anything.
They do whatever they want. And that's a little bit too random, I think.
Yeah, I think, for most of our permit applications are very simple, so it would not be difficult to fill out. We could, and when you come get a home permit or permit to build a fence, on that permit is the list of the conditions that are usually pulled straight out of the ordinance. It's the ordinance requirements for
Well,
that permit.
Terry has some samples. It'd be interesting to see what kind of information they're asking
Yeah.
for and what they want in order to issue a permit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a business owner affidavit and signature, so to your point, you read the rules, you sign off that I've read them, I agree to them. And with this particular one for Onslow County, I don't know about Durham County, there is a fee to cover town costs for processing that,
Most our business licenses are $50 or $100 or something.
Yeah, we just charge a nominal fee for processing. We wouldn't be looking to make any money off of it or anything like that.
There are some huge concerns that can be eliminated if we do this the right way. So for example, just because I have one on my street, they've gone out of business, thank God, but hours of operation, right? So If 14 guys show up at 6:30 in the morning with trucks and equipment, and they're carrying down electrical supply, that's disruptive to a neighborhood, right? Right. Hazardous material waste that they put out at the curb, right? Junk wires, I could go on. Signage, what kind of signage can you have for a business in the home? Can you have signage at all? Can it be just a discrete shingle, pun intended, and so on? With the number of employees, the occupation, and so on and so forth. We'll give people pause, and it will take to another level people who are serious, like I want to run a business. I want to be a tutoring service, and I have several assistants, and they have offices, and here's what we do, here's how we contact our clients, and the hours of operation, we don't work on Saturday, and so, whatever. I think it will be much more orderly.
We go through the supplemental regulation for home occupations. You'll see some of that stuff in there, but I have some other examples from other municipalities, looked at their standards, and I think we're missing a few things in ours. Yeah, well, I'm hoping we're going to talk about it today, so.
There's tutors and piano teachers in every town. Go to Mrs. Smith's house, and she teaches you how to play the piano, and then you leave, somebody else comes in, she teaches them.
My understanding, that's what a home occupation is. It's not, I have a commercial business with dump trucks and skid steers and graders, and by the way, I want to keep them at my house and store gravel and dirt and everything else at my house, and it's in a residential zone. That's not a home occupation.
What is our policy on that? So commercial businesses, just as Terry just described, is that a prohibited use? Is that, what caveats do we put in there?
So the issue, the issue that we have right now, in my opinion, is that our current home occupation standards are so broad that there's very little delineation between, it's very easy for a commercial operation to fall into that category and be permitted because the regulations are pretty sparse that we have right now. It's certainly, I'll be frank, the least that I've seen in my professional career for home occupations, the least regulation I've seen anywhere. So that's kind of the rub, as we think about it, it's a full business. Well, even if it is, if it meets that, what little criteria we have for a home occupation, well, it can be classified as a home occupation.
The regulations, though, that we're suggesting, that helps to address some of those current inadequacies, correct?
I think it's a start, yes, sir. I think, as Terry mentioned, she had some additionals that she'd like to discuss. And I think, to Mr. Bach's point, a permitting requirement could go a long way. Especially if we implement new standards, it makes sense to have a permit, because not only are they coming in and getting a permit, they're being made aware of the new standards that we have in place.
And it's not a prohibitive cost.
No, we charge a processing fee for permits for $35. I don't imagine we
Yeah,
would
we
go
don't
much higher
make it
than that.
onerous, we want
Yeah.
to make it orderly,
Oh,
predictable.
Oh, my gosh.
On that same line, the last line, prohibit accessory buildings or outside storage. I have a 12 by 12.
Well, that would be for the home occupation to use. So let's say you have a home occupation, and you have a piece of equipment that you store in your backyard. This would prohibit you from storing that piece of
Put in my
equipment.
backhoe or
Yeah.
my, okay.
Or building a shelter that you're specifically using to store all your materials for your home occupation, or running your home occupation out of, Typically want it to, what I've seen in the past is you want it to maintain the appearance of a home and not,
Yeah.
a business, which when you
I just didn't want to
start
stop
building
people
all these accessory structures for
from having a
the,
storage building in their
no,
backyard.
no, as long as you're not using it for home occupation.
Yeah. I store my Christmas tree in it.
Yes, sir.
Does it make sense to add definitions in here? Like, what is a home occupation versus what is a commercial business?
So, you get a little tricky there because what you would then need to do is create the commercial business designation in your table of uses and prohibit it. You know what I mean? So the best way is to make sure that you define a home occupation and you regulate it in a way that ensures that it doesn't evolve into a full-blown business and take over kind of the residential nature of the neighborhood. Because then if it doesn't meet the home, let's say you're selling something at your house and you can't meet the home occupation standard because you have 5 employees and we only allow whatever number we allow, 1, 2, whatever. Well, then you say, well, then I could look at it and say, well, you don't meet the home occupation standard, so you're retail. Well, retail is not allowed in the R6 zoning district, so you're not allowed to have that use in the zoning district. I think I understand where you're coming from, though, yeah.
We don't have too many of these, but we do have a number of those, and it's unsightly.
Any other discussion around home occupation?
No, definitions are helpful, but they're tricky. If you have a lawn care business, can you put the tractor in your driveway? Does that make you commercial?
Good question.
I don't know.
I worked in one jurisdiction that limited the size of the trailer that you could have associated with your home occupation. So if it was
Yeah.
8 feet, it was fine. If it was 10 feet, it was too big.
Yeah, it does need some work. I guess overkill.
Okay. Moving through a couple more of these quickly. Retaining walls, establishing a supplemental criteria to reiterate our fill requirements. That's just, once again, our existing fill requirements added in to make sure that when people know they get a retaining wall, they need to meet our fill ordinances. Religious institutions, requiring accessory or incidental uses to meet all the supplemental regulations of the use, in addition to the principal use. So I think what was trying to be captured there was things like if you've been to a large church, they may have a coffee shop or they may have daycare, making sure that the church meets all those requirements for the daycare and not just church requirements, if that makes sense. Contractors' offices with outside storage, clarify the screening requirements to be an opaque fence or an opaque vegetative buffer. Walls and fences, this one's more of a consolidation where privacy wall regulations were consolidated into the fencing requirements as well, so that'd be one supplement regulation section. Limiting community or municipal sewage and water treatment plants in residential zoning to 1 acre. We used our existing facility off of Yacht Drive as the caveat for that, pegged it off of that one. Coliseum stadiums designed to accommodate more than 1,000 people, making pervious materials for the parking areas a requirement there. Anybody's ever been to a stadium, they usually have a real big parking area, so making that pervious would go a long way towards water quality. Restaurants with drive-through services, the planning board recommended limiting drive-through aisle stacking, which is, if you've ever been to a drive-through, it's kind of the area that's designated for you to pull into to make sure it didn't encroach on pedestrian, handicap, or other drive aisles, and require opaque screening for drive-through stacking areas, essentially trying to keep the headlights out of somebody's yard when they're adjacent to residential or another property. Agriculturally related businesses, requiring those to be located on a bona fide farm. Those that don't know, the state sets requirements in order to be considered a bona fide farm, so making sure that businesses are on the same property. Commercial recreation outdoor facilities, limiting the total site size and the height for that. We pegged those off of the existing golf putt-putt course in order to try to keep it from being non-conforming. I think the feedback we heard was that the scale of something like that was okay, but we didn't want it to be, much bigger or more intense. So we tried to kind of look at what it was specific of that one in terms of size. Floating homes, not that we have any here in the town, but specifying that they meet CAMA and special flood hazard requirements and that they not encroach on the riparian setback from adjacent properties. Then hotels and motels, proposing a maximum density per acre in the CB zoning district. And that's another one that we looked at existing hotels here on the island and pegged the number of rooms per acre to some of the ones we have, knowing that some of the feedback has been that we maybe like some of our existing small hotels, but we don't want, a very intense hotel zoning here. And once again, this one actually is good because it avoids creating a nonconformity, because all of our existing hotels can meet that density requirement since we pegged it off of that.
As well as the 2 proposed hotels, right? As we
Yes,
talked
sir.
about that,
Yes,
they
sir.
meet that.
We'll take a look at those. Yes,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
So that's all of the general, and I realize that's a high-level review, and we've been at it for some time now. I would open it up to questions, and I think Terry had some, she's mentioned a few times, some specific things she wanted to discuss in the red line, so I'm free to answer any other questions or discussion or hear any additional feedback.
Yeah, so I don't, I'm just one person on this council, so I want my colleagues to hear my concerns, but, to change anything, obviously, we got to have, folks buy-in on it. So that's why I think it's important to go through these. Start?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Go
All right,
ahead.
so 7.2, accessory buildings and structures. 7.2.7 says the maximum building height shall be 20 feet. My recommendation would be to add, or not higher than the height of the primary residence, in case it's a one-story home with a low slope roof on a concrete pad. You don't want the accessory structure being taller than the house. Section 7.7, home occupations. You have the red line that Matt provided us with, what he was talking about, the first 7.1 through 6 are what we currently have as supplemental regs. The things in red are additions that the planning board recommended. One of my biggest concerns about the home occupations is the parking. Employees coming to pick up business vehicles and then leaving their vehicles. And in 7.7.10, we've said the parking must be met off the street. I would like it if it said it shall not be in the right-of-way. So they've got to get the vehicles in their garage, carport, driveway, but they can't just pull in and park in the right-of-way all day till they come back.
Yeah, some of that happening.
And we have some of that
Yes, we
happening.
do.
Yeah. I had the question about registering, compelling them to register with the town. And then there's a whole list of things that, no toxic, explosive, flammable things, no external or internal alterations to, that would increase the fire. I mean, there's all kinds of things. Planning board covered a lot of them. You can limit the hours of operation, which John mentioned. You can limit how many non-residential employees other than the homeowners can be there at a time. So like if it's a piano teacher, they're probably only going to have 1 or 2 people there at a time. If you're running a commercial business, do you have your 10 employees there all the time? That would be a violation if we stipulated the number of people on the property. I don't know that how we have it written is specific enough, but I don't think any products related to the business should be visible from the street. So the shed that got built that's now full of bales of pine needles and pine straw, you see that from the street, you shouldn't, it's not very residential friendly.
The pine straw and all that in the shed, we're taking other measures to stop that type of a home construction business. aren't we?
Well, they're not in compliance because if they've built additional buildings on their property to house their stuff, that's, they're allowed to use a certain percentage of their home, 25% of the total floor area. But I know of one situation where they're not using the home at all, but the detached garage is the office, the business office, and then there are accessory sheds on the property to store materials. Under 7.9, satellite dish antennas, the last one we're saying they shall not be located in a front yard. And then what was stricken was, and shall be hidden from view of the public right-of-way. I think they really shouldn't be in the public's view. That's a little different with the satellite dishes we have now, because they're not as bad as when they first came out, you know what I'm saying? And sometimes you got to put them on the roof, and obviously from here you got to point them toward Wilmington, because you're not going to get anything in the ocean, but I would just be a little more stringent on that. And then we get down to section 7.17, private clubs or lodges. Can we specify the hours of operation? Is that allowed? So there.
Was that number again? I'm sorry.
7.17, private clubs or lodges.
Oh, I mean, yes, ma'am, and hours of operations can be set via zoning regulations. We have a few that are set throughout the ordinance. It's a little bit few and far between, but certainly you can.
Ones that could potentially be disruptive to residents are the ones that I would focus on, having set hours of operation, like not beyond 11 p.m. or 12 p.m. on the weekends or whatever. And then section 7.21, contractor office outside storage. This was one of the ones that I was concerned did not require dark sky lighting, because a contractor with outside storage, if they have equipment and such, they're going to have it probably lit up pretty well for security. And so I was concerned that there was no lighting requirement there that prevented light pollution. Under 7.2.6 recreational vehicles, I was curious the logic behind 180 days versus some other measurement of time.
180 days is what's currently in our ordinance. I don't know why. I think it's related to considering something like a transient use versus a permanent use. I think.
But that's specific to campgrounds and not to residents.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Again, section 7.60, clubs and lodges, nonprofit, hours of operation, question about that. The section 7.62, manufacturing light, even though it's light versus heavy, it still seems like that 50 feet from adjacent properties is not very far. I guess if it's all enclosed and they don't have all the equipment that goes with some types of processing or manufacturing outside, silos and,
And I'm glad you brought that up. That is kind of the distinction that the definition set between light and heavy manufacturing. Light manufacturing is the operations are all enclosed versus heavy. And not only is it enclosed, all the impacts from it, like there shouldn't be detectable noise or
Okay.
fumes or anything like that to be classified as light manufacturing.
50-foot setbacks, pretty good size setback for a light industrial facility.
depends on if your house is at that 50-foot mark.
Right.
Okay, and then when we get over to section 7.64, colleges, universities, and community colleges, and several of these through here, schools K through 12, school, trade, or vocation. So Matt, you and I had a discussion about identifying our types of streets. And so we use, under college and universities, we say shall be provided by way of a collector or higher designation street, not a local street. Yet we don't define collector or higher designation streets in our definitions that we just revised. We talked about the small food pantries at the libraries, private libraries. I think the supplemental regs that we put in place are good. I don't know that they encompass everything, so should there be something in here that says they have to be enclosed with a lid or a door? Because otherwise you get the wind blowing and you get the rain coming down and they get damaged or they get blown across the neighborhood. That's what I'd like to see, is that they must be enclosed. And then, do we have any provision for the upkeep of them, making sure that, if they're not in the town right of way, who do we look to when they start to get ratty or need some attention or become damaged? Again, schools K through 12, the same thing. We're saying collector or higher designation street. And we didn't mention anything about lighting in the school's outdoor recreational facilities. It says it has to be buffered from adjacent residentially zoned lots, just with a buffer yard, but we don't talk about lighting and light pollution. 7.67, school, trade, or vocation, same thing with the same term is used with the streets there. Get over to 7.72, penal and correctional facilities. I just have a question mark about prohibiting that use altogether. And then in several of these here, we do pick up dark sky lighting, so I think there's some we might be missing out on. Dark sky lighting. Under coliseums, while we don't have one and probably don't expect to have one, can we specify hours of operation? So if there's a concert, it has to be over by, 11 p.m. on the weekday and midnight on the weekends. Under 7.79, dwelling multifamily, and under like the townhouse development, do we have any, somewhere else in our ordinance, do we have any open space requirements? Okay. Or was that yeah, we do, or,
Not specific to dwellings, or not specific to multifamily. Townhouses you would, because you actually subdivide the property, so you'd meet the subdivision open space requirements, but not to
Okay.
multifamily.
Other thing I'd like to see us consider or talk about is when we have multifamily or townhouse developments that we compel parking to be interior to the project, much like the folks were going to do at the hotel over by the Elks Lodge. The parking was going to be underneath the hotel. It was going to be screened, rather than having what you see when you drive by be this sea of cars. So the buildings are oriented to the street and the parking is interior. Under 7.87, nightclubs and social clubs, again, a question about hours of operation, and a question about is outdoor seating allowed? Oftentimes, what these places will do is they have the smoking area outside, the doors get open, everybody spills outside, they become the party outside, so we don't address that in any way. Same thing under restaurants, 7.90, restaurants with drive-through services, hours of operation, and we do nothing to talk about the number of windows they can have, whether a single window or a multiple window in their drive-through. We're saying that stacking shouldn't encroach into lanes of traffic or right-of-way, but we don't talk about the location of the ordering in the window, because if they close at 11 and their drive-through is open till 2, where's that magnifying box? Is it next to the house behind the restaurant? Outdoor speakers, things like that. We don't say anything about that in here. Uh, 7.91 truck stop, again, a question, is that something that could be prohibited? But again, under 7.91.2, we say direct access to a major arterial street, yet we don't define that in our definitions. Under 7.98, mining and quarry, that's another one to consider for prohibition, but if we aren't able to prohibit it, there's nothing in here about dust control or noise control. 7.100, public recreation facility outside. Just a question, can we stipulate hours of operation there? .102, commercial recreation facility outdoor. I don't see us doing anything to prohibit or limit or specify aerial components. So we say can't be over 30 feet in height in the CB zoning district, but that doesn't really have anything to do with installing rides or zip lines or things like that we've heard about in the past. So aerial components, noise, and hours of operation. Um, 7.107, kennels. Again, we use collector or higher classification street. We talk about associated kennels and animal runs. They have a certain stipulation unless they are located within a fully enclosed, roofed and walled, soundproof structure. Is there anything that compels us to make those runs, if they're fully enclosed, be conditioned for the animals? Or they're just stifling hot? And, if they have outdoor runs, are there certain hours that they can use that? We don't specify the size of the exercise runs. We don't talk about their location relative to streams or water or wetlands and how they hose those things out and where that wastewater goes. And we're at the end.
Thank you.
I don't know that all of those are viable, that we can do them, that everybody wants to do them, but they were things that just jumped out at me when I looked at them.
Thorough.
Very
We are
thorough.
trying to put some teeth in these, not to keep people but to craft the kind of community that we say we want to live in.
We need to have a conversation with our attorney about prohibiting the standards therein. We need to share with our attorney some of the things that are, I'm going to call them proposed, right? Can we do that? So that we get a feel for what is tenable and what isn't, right? So we're not constantly saying, oh, 382, can't do it. You know, we have proposals, will they fly? Can we go further? Like, I see no reason to have a truck stop in town, or to have a coliseum, and, you know, or to have aerial things flying over in the CB, and so on. It's just, they're incorporated in this list, and either we can fight that and win, or at least present a case that somebody administratively or judicially will look at, or we have to accept what we have. And I know it's all new, but that's what we pay attorneys for, so, right?
Yeah, so I guess the next question would be,
They do research.
would you prefer to have that conversation prior to having a public hearing? And if so, would the board like to schedule it like we did with the table of uses, where you have a public hearing and then action in a later month? Or, I mean, I'm open to everybody's,
We have a pretty
feelings on that.
specific list here. I think if we were to call Bro up and say, we've gone through this in some detail, here are the things that we would find right from the jump objectionable. Here are some of the things that we've tried to rein in. You know, we've had suggestions on specific points. Are we on solid ground? Can we go further? Do we have to let go of, you know, if they build a coliseum, then people will come and we'll, you know, we have, because right now we're just speculating, right? And so maybe Bro will say you can go further. You can fight for the definition and the vision that's in your strategic plan, and, you know, that's an argument you can make, or that's an argument a court will dismiss instantly, like that doesn't matter to them, right? And I fear that it will all be about property rights, as it generally is in the state, but we'll see.
Just to add to that, if I could, I mean, Councilman Martin made a point that about being anti-business. We're just 180 degrees opposite that. We've got to expand our commercial base. So being business-friendly, doing the right thing for businesses, but putting in guardrails, right? So for businesses that make sense, at least in our mind, to prohibit it if we have that legal right to do that, but continue to be very pro-business and really help to work with our economic development manager to continue to drive our commercial base.
I'd rather get education from Bro before we turn it over to the town people.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
We might agree with them on something, then find out Bro tells us that there's no merit to that.
There's a whole host of information out there, the School of Government, and they have a Coates Canons on it, and, but, yeah, I think we ought to find out.
I think if we don't do that, we're going to undercut our position, right? And I'll go back to what I've said before publicly, I'll say it again. I don't have to like what the law requires, my duty is to follow the law. So what we don't know is what degree of discretion we have, right? And I think where we have discretion, we will act to protect the community vision we have and to be business friendly, and where we're forced to accept this is the law, you know, we're going to accept it. It's not a matter of what we like, it's a matter of what the law requires.
Having that information in hand prior to the public hearing, and let's get their input and make sure that.
So we're not sitting there
for
saying
alignment.
yes to something that we end up saying no to a week later.
Yeah, and really just for scheduling, asking this because basically we'd have to advertise next week for the, if we were going to have a public hearing in February. So if council would like some, even to consider what Ms. Gardner said
Yeah.
before we schedule that.
I think Councilman Kraft's right. We don't want to get over our skis on this, you know. Other than 211, I can't foresee why we'd want a truck stop, but.
Or Coliseum.
Or Coliseum, or a number of things in here. But if they're legally permitted, they are. You know, it's- Right?
But if we could have those answers provided to you within the next less than a month, would we want to proceed to public hearing at the February meeting if you have that legal information? Or would you like another work session prior
Information
to?
that Terry shared, I mean, what do you, how do we want to deal with that? Do we want to bring that up again, where you massage it and work on it, we come back in and?
I mean, there's a couple of ways that we could address it. I think, well, one, I can't amend the planning board's recommendation that comes forward as was amended by the planning board. Should the whole of council or the majority of council be in agreement with Ms. Gardner, when you got to the adoption phase, you could amend it with, additional recommendations. So I guess it's at the pleasure of the board whether you'd like to talk about it further or whether you feel comfortable like you could make that motion to amend with additional
Well, I
stipulations.
think in the spirit that we've been trying to work, you have all the changes and recommendations, send out the revised, and I'll happy to get a legal opinion, right,
We'll do that.
on
Yeah,
noxious things. And then if, we're essentially all in agreement, we can hold a public hearing. We're trying to move forward here.
Yeah.
30% of questions I raised today, legal counsel says, well, you can't do that, and we don't even have to talk about it again.
And we
thought
just
you
want
had
to know
good
those.
research.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Pardon?
I thought you had good research.
We would just want to know those before we advertise, though. We want to advertise to the most stringent possible amendments that would be made, and that way they could be adopted right then at that public hearing if you want to, or if you put it to another meeting. So just make sure the public is aware of what could be changed.
As much as we love meetings, if we can avoid one, that would be great.
I'm looking at my calendar, it's crowded.
So, revise and attorney review, and then public hearing February, and then come back and contemplate before maybe a vote in March.
Well,
Is that
yeah, I think the updated list, because Mr. Martin is not here, is important, right?
Yeah.
So, and then the legal approval, I think most of this, seems to me, would be approved, but again, I don't want to presume, because I'm not a lawyer. And then the mega question of, can we be more assertive in prohibiting things outright? Use the Coliseum as an example. However, if Russell Crowe's coming, I'm,
That's what Wilmington's for.
Well, we need an answer.
or Denzel, I mean,
So we're all, just for me, so I can prepare a public hearing in February. Yes, it sounds like.
hopefully, get all this done, yeah.
All right.
All right.
We'll go ahead and advertise that.
Yeah.
A motion to adjourn.
Could, I don't know if Lisa will allow us, but can Matt explain, you were going to explain to us?
Oh.
about the-
Thank you. I wrote it down on a note and almost forgot.
Oh, thank you, yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah.
forgot it too. It's mind numbing. Go ahead.
An open.
Yeah, so I think you've all received some communication and feedback through this process about our trash can ordinance through the town. The town has certain streets whereon there's regulations for how long your trash can can stay out, how it's supposed to be stored after. It mainly applies to the beachfront streets, Ocean Beach, Pelican, Dolphin, I believe. Sorry, I don't have my computer
That's
in front of me,
chapter
but-
2422.
Yes, so that is in the general code of ordinances. That is not in the Unified Development Ordinance. Should you want to amend that in order to apply to more sections of town, that does not require a planning board comment in order to do that. That's something that council can amend. That being said, I do have to speak from a staff perspective. As you all just heard, it took 9 people 2 weeks to ride down every street in the town of Oak Island and identify all property violations that they could. So while I haven't run numbers or anything like that, I can anticipate that if we, say expanded it island-wide or something like that, it would take a lot of staff time and effort to actually do that, that enforcement and make sure that it's even on all streets. Because not only are we having to ride down every road, it's different streets, we have different pickup times associated with it. So I'd be happy to look into that a little bit further from a staff perspective as far as what that would look like. So 2 answers for you. One, you don't have to send it back to the planning board or anything like that, should you want to modify that or amend it. And I can do some research for you on what that would look like from a staffing perspective going
Yeah.
forward in code enforcement.
I, for one, would like a staff recommendation.
Yeah.
Well, I guess staff analysis followed by a recommendation,
Yeah.
right? And it may be, thinking literally off the page for a minute, that an educational campaign will help. And that enforcement need not be everywhere, every street, every time, but that we will enforce it,
Yeah.
kind of, and you can assess how your manpower would be
Yeah.
deployed in that. Or if your conclusion is it's not tenable, then just tell us that. But I think we've all received this complaint repeatedly, right? And so, depending on the street, depending on the situation, right?
Just like junkyards and broken down Winnebagos, broken down golf carts in yards, the neighbors usually tip us off as to where the problem
They
areas
do.
are.
Yes, sir.
So I would think, even if we don't go overboard on the patrolling, if a neighbor were to tip us off as to where a problem area was, we'd have every right to
Yeah,
write a
absolutely.
code violation.
Yeah, we write violations based on, reports all the time. Well, and you're right, education's a huge part of it, because what we don't want to have happen is, you wrote me a citation, and I know the guy over here 2 blocks away didn't get a citation, because we didn't happen to ride down the street that day.
And typically,
Yeah, we do.
neighbors are quite familiar with their neighborhood, and they know if they're not full-time residents and they're just visiting for a weekend, I just roll their card back. I mean, I don't ask any questions.
I do that for my next door neighbor.
Right, yeah. So let's look into it, give us an analysis and then a recommendation.
I'll run some numbers on how much time staff spends on our current designation and try to estimate.
Well, I mean, right off the top, my recommendation to you, as you think about it, would be, it would be a multi-purpose visit. Like if you're going down that street, you're writing everything you see.
Yeah.
You're not just looking at trash can, you're gonna,
Yes, sir.
because you want to maximize your time with that. So,
Sounds good to me.
thank you, Terry. I almost forgot.
One follow-up question. if I could,
Yeah.
On the code violation. So the syntax that we use is you're standing in the front of the house in the right-of-way, and you're looking at the house to see what's visible from the street, correct? So I've been getting a number of complaints from the adjacent neighbors that the lawn is, the front is finally getting cleaned up, but it's all going in the backyard. And it's all going again, right up against the fence. And and so how difficult is that to incorporate?
Yeah, it's always a tricky question, dealing with code enforcement, because my folks can only go where they're legally allowed on the property. So if there's a privacy fence, we can't go on the other side of that privacy fence without a property owner's permission. That being said, if a neighbor perchance were to invite our zoning technician to observe a code violation from their property where we can plainly see it, then we can certainly pursue something like that. Photos are good. I always recommend that they're time and date stamped, so we have that information available as well. But once we establish that, we can, if there's more pushback, there's always the option to go to the magistrate and get an administrative inspection warrant for a property that we have reason to believe is in violation and is just not responding. So, yeah, if anybody wants to reach out and it's not visible from the street, and, if they send us a good photo or invite a zoning technician to take their own photos from their property where they're invited, that we've done that plenty of times, yes, sir.
I think that once we organize and execute a campaign around the identified high target areas in the right-of-way, people will see the transformation, because it is about vehicles and impediments in the right-of-way. And they'll see that we have a list of additional complaints, right? And hopefully they'll realize that they need to do something instead of us checking that. I don't want to turn it into a chase. So, yeah, I'm hopeful that will change the way people think about it. Well, okay, that truck has been there for 8 years and they've never done it. Oh, they're removing it. Okay, well, I better get mine out of there. Typically how it works.
No, it's funny, it's human nature sometimes, right? You get blinded to things, you don't see them anymore because it's been there so long. Or, you're just used to rolling your trash can out 3 days before the pickup day and letting it sit out there for a day or two, and education and awareness.
That city is syncretic too. I have some neighbors who put their trash out, before noon. It's supposed to be after, it's just, some who are slow to collect, some not, As long as they're all collected and it isn't intrusive on the beauty of the neighborhood, I'm fine with that. So, all right, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you, Matt.
Thank you all.
Ms. Anderson, have
Thank
you
you,
heard
Matt.
anything about weather?